The Department of Justice wants to speak with Mike Pence as a witness in its January 6th criminal probe. The New York Times breaking this story. According to two people familiar with the request, the DOJ reached out to the former vice president, and he is open to considering the request. Pence declined to comment to the Times. This is a criminal investigation. It's not a congressional investigation like the January 6th committee has been conducting. Pence recently saying this.
Congress has no right to my testimony. We have a separation of powers under the Constitution of the United States, and I believe it would establish a terrible precedent for the Congress to summon a vice president of the United States to speak about deliberations that took place at the White House.
But now Pence is considering an interview with the DOJ. This request coming prior to a special counsel being tapped for the DOJ's probe. Mike Pence, as a witness, he would know a lot about the lead up to the insurrection and the events of that day. And this news coming as Trump blasts the United States Supreme Court after it allowed Trump's tax returns to be turned over to Congress. Trump writing, "Why would anybody be surprised that the Supreme Court has ruled against me? They always do. The Supreme Court has lost its honor, prestige, and standing, and has become nothing more than a political body with our country paying the price. Shame on them." Reminder there, 3 of those Supreme Court justices, they were handpicked by Donald Trump. Joining me now is former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti and Hugo Lowell, a investigations reporter. Is that right? Yeah, Hugo, you'll go with that. Yeah, political investigative reporter for The Guardian. Renato, I'd like to start with you. Pence reportedly considering, and I put that in quotes, speaking to the DOJ, but clearly Pence knows the teeth of a subpoena. So do you think he's going to try to negotiate terms directly with the DOJ, or do you think he'll mother may I with Trump, no pun intended, before he does so?
I don't think so. I think at this point, Katie, there's no love lost between these two gentlemen. I think at this point they're political rivals, and so Pence wants to seem to his base like he's not being cooperative, like he doesn't want to help the Justice Department. But he knows at the end of the day, the case law in the D.C. makes very clear that executive privilege is not going to be an excuse to escape a grand jury subpoena, and he is going to want to have his attorney next to him. So I think he's going to negotiate voluntary testimony.
I mean, Hugo, what would this mean for Trump if Pence ends up talking to the DOJ? I don't want to be too Machiavellian here, but we know Pence has his eyes on that 2024 Oval Office as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we don't know yet if there's a subpoena. In fact, it's not clear what the arrangement or what the discussions with DOJ and Pence's lawyer is. But certainly that it is true, and we have separately confirmed that Pence is seriously considering talking to DOJ and going before a potential grand jury in D.C. And the implications are really big because Pence is one of the few people who know, in fact, maybe the only person who knows the content of discussion he had with Trump on January 5, the day before the Capitol attack. And you have to remember, this was the point when Trump was desperately trying to get him to accept and try and overturn the election on January 6th. And this was Trump trying to implore him to do something that we now know is, or we knew then, was illegal. And so the content of that discussion is really key. We know what Trump was saying because there were people in the Oval Office when Trump was talking to Pence, but we don't know what Pence said. And Pence's testimony could be really key. It could kind of reveal the insight into what Trump was thinking, his intent on January 6th, and I think that could really forward a DOJ investigation.
I think we've had a preview, though, Hugo, because of the book that Michael Pence has written. I think he's pretty much already spoken to the public. Renato, the New York Times reports complicating the situation is whether Mr. Trump would try to invoke executive privilege, you mentioned that a minute ago, to stop him, as in Pence, or to limit Pence's testimony, a step that he has taken with limited success so far with other former officials. What's the bottom line, Renato? Could executive privilege stop Mike Pence from voluntarily or even under subpoena testifying?
Yeah, the bottom line, Katie, is it's not going to work. It's very well established in the D.C. Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals, overseeing that portion of the country, that executive privilege does not trump the need of criminal prosecutors to obtain testimony via a grand jury subpoena, as long as they can't get the information elsewhere. And as Hugo just mentioned a moment ago, no one really knows what happened in those conversations between Trump and Pence other than Mr. Pence. And so obviously there's going to be a need for that. And also, Mike Pence was present during conversations about what Jeffrey Clark and John Eastman were saying and doing, their plans and their proposals And we know they're within the DOJ's crosshairs as well.
You know, Renato, before I go back to Hugo, a quick question about what I mentioned anecdotally. The fact that Mike Pence has written a book and that he's actually put information within it about conversations, interactions he's had vis-a-vis January 6th, does that help the DOJ in any way to bootstrap legal arguments to be able to make sure that they can actually get Pence to testify?
I think viewers know you're a lawyer. That's a smart question, Katie. And the answer is absolutely. Because that means also there's a waiver of privilege. That's an excellent point on your part, because even to the extent there was privilege, which there wasn't here, that will be overcome by the waiver.
Hugo, as we mentioned at the beginning of this segment, Trump is clearly angry with the Supreme Court. Kind of ironic, because as we mentioned, he handpicked at least 3 of those justices. Let's take a really quick listen to all of the excuses he's given before as to why he was not going to turn over his tax returns. Take a quick listen.
I would love to give them, but I'm not going to do it while I'm under audit. You don't learn anything from a tax return. I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes. When she releases her 33,000 emails, they're under audit. They have been for a long time. They're extremely complex. People wouldn't understand them.
Hugo, what are you hearing on the Hill about the timing of Treasury turning him over? We know Treasury has the returns, could be just like this. And what about the Senate Finance Committee? Can they also get Trump's records just as the Ways and Means Committee was able to get his records?
Look, we're in a real time crunch here, right? The Hill is trying to figure out if there's a window here for them to get his tax returns, analyze them, and see if there are potential legislative fixes that need to be made in the tax code, or potential criminal referrals, right? If there's anything illegal in there that they find. And so I think what they're trying to figure out is there a transmission mechanism that will enable them to get the records fast enough before the end of this Congress? I mean, it's a really limited time span, and I think this is what's really at issue. I mean, we're at Thanksgiving week this week, the House is out, Senate is out, and then we're in December, and we have really 2 weeks of potential legislative days where they can look at this, and so before we get into the next Congress. And so this is the real obstacle. And I think both the House and Senate are very attuned to this, and Trump's also attuned to this. And I think Trump world, if you talk to people around the former president, he is now trying to find a way if he can slow walk the production of his tax returns to maybe the House and Senate, and try and ensure that the time that Congress gets this is when Republicans are in control of the House.
But the fact that Treasury has these returns, though, doesn't that end run an attempt by Trump to be able to slow walk the production?
I think so, but this is classic Trump. He's trying to find any way to delay. He's already managed to delay it for 3 years to get the tax returns to the Ways and Means Committee. And so I think whether it's with pressure on Republicans or if it's pressure on kind of Treasury officials, he is trying to find desperately, I might add, any way to make sure that these documents get there on Capitol Hill as late as possible so that he can try and pump this into a Republican House.
Renato, Mueller prosecutor Andrew Weissman wrote an op-ed giving advice to the new special counsel Jack Smith. He writes, quote, "This intense public interest suggests the importance of undervalued dimensions of the special counsel role, communication and education. His ability to explain and educate will be critical to the acceptance of the department's mission by the American public." By all accounts, it looks like special counsel Jack Smith, Renato, is moving full speed ahead. Are there any major obstacles on the immediate event horizon for him?
I actually don't think there are a lot of obstacles. The 11th Circuit yesterday cleared out what would have been an obstacle in Judge Cannon, right? That ruling obviously hamstrung the DOJ's investigation, forced them to spend a lot of time responding to her arguments to the special counsel the special master. And now I think that's going to be cleared out by the Court of Appeals. I actually think he has some clear runway ahead. And Jack Smith has some advantages that special counsel Mueller never did. If you don't forget, Mueller had to deal with obstruction during the course of his investigation. Trump was trying to fire him on multiple occasions. He had an attorney general who was hostile to him at certain points, right? Trying to hide the results of his investigation. So I think now Jack Smith has a clear runway, and we should, I think, give him the opportunity to do what he's there to do, which is, frankly, to press forward and with a prosecutorial mindset and experience that the Attorney General doesn't have.
As we give thanks tomorrow for things that are blessings, Renato Mariotti and Hugo Lowell, you are both, but I'm also grateful for a rule of law Supreme Court when we get it. Thank you both for being here this evening. I appreciate both of you.